A very good afternoon, everyone. Since time is short, I will just stick to the key points. Okay, solid hydrogen logistics addresses two of the biggest climate pain points which are not resolved today. Namely, one, what do we do when infrastructure doesn't work? And two, long duration, clean energy storage without using hydrocarbons. With solid hydrogen logistics, with solid hydrogen logistics, hydrogen is immediately packaged at the point of production into a solid chemical compound. Sodium borohydride, or NaBH4, is energy dense, non-flammable, non-explosive, and can be stored at ambient temperature without pressure. All logistics is then carried out in solid form, and hydrogen gas is only released on demand at user location when required. And this was done through an exothermic chemical reaction where no external energy input is required. Galaxy FCT is a hydrogen technology company with a patented process that enables rapid and efficient release of hydrogen gas from solid feedstock. This allows us to make hydrogen gas available on demand anywhere. High cost of NaBH4 is the last remaining bottleneck for this ecosystem. But the fundamentals suggest that this should not be the case. If you look at the constituent parts, sodium comes from salt, NaCl. Hydrogen comes from water, H2O. Borax can be recycled from the byproduct after hydrogen gas is released. Therefore, the main cost is then energy and process costs. Current processes require between 200 to 250 kilowatt hours to produce the equivalent of 1 kilogram of hydrogen gas in the form of sodium borohydride. For rapid cost reduction, hyperscaling is key. To hyperscale, the entire production chain from renewable energy, hydrogen to sodium borohydride needs to be integrated at unprecedented scale in the lowest cost renewable locations on the planet. I'll call these prime sites. Think of these as gigantic desert sunlight refineries that produces huge quantities of sodium borohydride. Remoteness and transmission will no longer be a bottleneck because once sodium borohydride is produced, it's cheap to store and easy to ship directly from production to end users wherever they may be. Desert solar prices reached a world record low of 1.04 cents per kilowatt hour in Saudi Arabia in April 2021. Technology learning curves, or Wright's law, predicts continuously falling costs given the massive projected global PV volumes ahead. This means the energy penalty for producing solid hydrogen in dollar terms will continue to shrink with every passing year. This slide shows a roadmap towards substantially lower NaBH4 production costs in the future. Let's talk about integrating two highly symbiotic green industry clusters that can take prime site hyperscaling to the next level. First, incorporating desalination to provide water for electrolysis and to enable agrivoltaics. Agriculture underneath solar panels minimizes water loss, improves solar panel efficiency. Desalination brine, typically an environmental hazard, can be distilled to produce salt required for NaBH4 production and also to recover other valuable minerals like magnesium and lithium. Secondly, new green steel and green aluminum plants can be integrated into prime sites to take advantage of the abundance of cheap green energy and cheap hydrogen. Massive quantities of waste heat produced by these plants can also be harnessed for NaBH4 production and brine recovery processes, all of which requires lots of heating, drying, and distillation. Here, let's talk about total ecosystem benefits. Conceptually, solid hydrogen logistics is essentially a bet that crushing NABH4 production costs within a controlled manufacturing-like environment is a much more winnable battle than fighting costly infrastructure challenges spread across the entire global hydrogen supply chain. Remember, tomorrow's hydrogen supply chain will be much longer, much more dissipated, and much more complex, making future infrastructure much more costly and problematic. And this will get worse the further we move away from ideal locations and conditions. Whenever infrastructure works, the best solution mankind has today is, of course, the green electron grid extended by batteries. But the green electron network is extremely infrastructure intensive. If we take a closer look at the landed areas of the world, you will see that maybe 10% plus or so would have excellent conditions for infrastructure. Another 15 to 20% is probably doable, but beyond that, conditions go from bad to worse to absolutely horrendous. Other clean tech solutions that we have today also happens to be extremely infrastructure intensive, and therefore they tend to compete for the same locations as the green electron network. By contrast, solid hydrogen, being infrastructure light, can seamlessly complement existing solutions, especially in the other 70% of the world. As solid hydrogen cost comes down, more and more solid hydrogen applications will become economically viable, causing an exponential rise in the total global demand for NABH4. As such, more hyperscale production will be required. This, in turn, generates a massive, sustained, multi-year demand for all associated renewables like PV panels, inverters, batteries, electrolyzers, fuel cells, and all other supply chain items. And this will create an environment that will encourage massive scale production, driving prices down further, and ultimately resulting in even lower NABH4 prices over time. Yes, this is a self-sustaining virtuous cycle that could fast-track the entire renewable supply chain. India has all the right conditions to make this happen and to secure a first-mover advantage in this strategic supply chain. What if we could get nations in the world to pool resources under a multilateral umbrella like the United Nations to map out several giant prime sites for shared hyperscale solid hydrogen production, where nations can jointly participate and contribute resources to. Final product, once produced, can be allocated and shipped back to individual nations using container vessels. Massive value creation comes from, one, leveraging the most productive locations on Earth at unprecedented scale. Two, lowers financing costs with the removal of political risk under the multilateral umbrella. Three, reducing the need to build transmission and distribution infrastructure in places which is not suited for. This ecosystem also provides a pragmatic and transparent network that makes it easy for rich countries to help poorer countries who are least responsible for historical emissions. This can be done by allocating a bigger percentage of total production for a smaller equity investment. If we can do this, we will be able to drive production costs of solid hydrogen down much more significantly and much faster. The immediate tangible economic benefits from this collaboration will also encourage greater degree of climate collaboration between nations in the future. Let me wrap up here. Here's a snapshot of the total ecosystem I've been talking about. Key point I want to emphasize, there is a price to pay to make hydrogen cheap to store, easy to move, safe to handle, and infrastructure light. But it is a price worth paying. What's more, it is a price that will get lower every passing year. By removing the twin hamstrings of infrastructure and long duration storage, we can hyperscale production immediately in the most productive locations on the planet, not just to create lots of green molecules affordably, but also to set in motion virtuous cycles and integrate symbiotic industry clusters which will continuously lower solid hydrogen costs and unleash the full potential of the entire renewable ecosystem. Finally, this ecosystem is also a pragmatic framework that can encourage and facilitate global climate collaboration despite the difficult geopolitical environment we have today. In concluding, let me highlight two systematic and deeply persistent biases in forecasting today. Bias number one, we systematically underestimate the power of learning curves at scale, especially in controlled manufacturing-like environments, semiconductors, solar PV, wind turbines, batteries, and so on. We've got it all wrong. They all got cheaper much faster than we imagined. Bias number two, we persistently overestimate our ability to deploy infrastructure projects on spec, on time, on budget, especially so when it comes to transmission and interdependent cross-border infrastructure projects. Many real-world things can and will go wrong, but because we cannot predict upfront what would happen and when they will happen, these events are typically reduced into a 5 to 10% contingency line item in a financial model and conveniently ignored thereafter. Of course, that's until the black swan comes back to roost. How many times have we heard people say, if we truly costed for everything that could go wrong, there would be no project and no one will make any money? My dear friends, if we can look beyond these systematic biases and adjust for them, we would realize that the tipping point for solid hydrogen logistics is already much closer than we think. We at Galaxy FCT will always look forward to work together with strategic partners, collaborators, and stakeholders to make this ecosystem happen. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.